Wow. Thank you, Craig. At least it wasn't like that Imperial March. Like, na, 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 na. Has this been a phenomenal day or what? All right. Yeah. Kudos to the whole team here for this. I've just learned a ton. And then after this, because I'm going to share some stuff with you that some of you at the end of it might be like, I need a drink. And the good news is they've got them. Let's dive in. Yeah, with that Star Wars entrance. I don't know, there's Star Wars and there's Spaceballs. And who's here seen Spaceballs, right? Is this gone? All right, good. I'm at least with some of my crowd. Yeah, so instead of ludicrous speed, just everything is AI speed. There's no way I can give myself a better intro than Craig, who I'm now going to hire as my hype man for every event I ever do again. I guess the one thing I'll just say here before I begin is emphasize what was said earlier. All of this will be available. All these slides have got a bunch of data, frameworks, and whatnot. Don't worry about trying to capture all of it. You can get the whole deck. And we'll just have a conversation around what's happening. So actually, as I'm starting out with slides, I want to use this as a little bit of a metaphor, because if you go back 50, 60 years, 60s, 70s, like what was involved in producing a slide presentation? It's crazy. You had to lay each slide out on a physical poster board. People would be using X-Acto knives and rubber cement. Anyone here even know what rubber cement is? It sounds crude. And then the photographer would come and shoot the slide, shoot the poster. That would then get developed, turn into the 35 millimeter slides. And this process took weeks, incredibly laborious, no ability to edit this stuff whatsoever. If a few thousand presentations were given a year, that was a lot. Fast forward into the 80s, and PowerPoint comes along, which originally was for the Mac and then got acquired by Microsoft. The most recent stats I've seen on this is something on the order of 30 million PowerPoint presentations are given every day somewhere in the world. And I know the obvious joke there is, I'm not sure all of them should be given, but you can't deny like just the orders of magnitude of democratization that happened with that. And that would just amped it up again. All of these AI tools that are enabling us to create content. I don't know if any of you have played a bit with Gamma. Awesome way to be able to create slide decks, even if you have no talent creating slide decks whatsoever. I just clicked through on a few things here. This is as close to a live demo as we'll get. I'm like, all right, let me try this out. Create with AI. All right, let's generate a deck. What do I want to have created? Say the most creative things marketers can build on their own with AI. Goes ahead, says, how about this as an outline for top? Hey, wow, that's not too bad. All right, cool. Let's go with that. What sort of style do I want it in? Okay, I'll pick from that. And then boom, here I've got like a of like beautifully designed slides, and it's all on this content. Now, again, this is not necessarily final. As a starting point, holy crap, these are literally the steps I took over a period of 60 seconds, a minute and a half. Now, I know there's this question of AI slop, and one of the things I noticed was, I don't think actually all these slides are in 16:9 format. So I say, can you just make sure they're all 16:9? It's okay, no problem. Sorry, it's like the intern who's, I'm sorry, I put cream in the coffee. I'll get something different for you. I'm like, okay, this is pretty good, but I don't want to work in that. I now want to work in PowerPoint. So I just download it as a PowerPoint deck, and then I am off to the races. This is one example of what we're just seeing, like so many different domains and capabilities. And this idea of like essentially things like slide creation that, again, once upon a time, took weeks for a single deck, to something that now can get created in literally minutes. But here's the thing, because while we talk a lot about that acceleration in speed and volume, the other thing I would say is for a lot of these tools, it's actually a dramatic expansion in the creativity that we can tap into. Again, some of the things I could do with Gamma. Oh man, if you'd asked me to try and do that on like poster boards with X-Acto knives, let's just say I'd be having a lot of bandages on me right now. This is the same pattern we're seeing over and over again. And to me, it's like the meta theme of this AI era is all these things that used to be scarce. We're now like having abundance, which is good in a lot of ways, but also really challenging. Like it requires us to rethink a lot of our process, a lot of how we work. All right. Now, talking about abundance. Anytime I'm in front of an audience that actually has had to deal with this at any point in time in their life, I just feel the need to apologize profusely. It's not my fault that this thing exploded the way it did. Starting with 150 some odd technologies back in 2011, I remember publishing the first one and I got all these comments on my blog that were like, yeah, that's just 150. That's just way too many companies. This is going to consolidate within a matter of years. Any day now. Last version we did back in May at over 15,000. I know it's really hard to read, so they said I should zoom in. That's better. I really should. I'll offer $20 to someone who can tell me what is the name of the oh, no. I know this is if something hasn't jumped the shark by now, I don't know what it would take. But yeah, this thing, it's crazy. And it's getting more crazy. In fact, I actually have some data. I'll just share a bit here on how crazy it's become. Because coming up to 2022, we're actually seeing a pretty decent leveling off of the MarTech landscape. The number of new companies was starting to slow down. The number of exits and consolidations were like ramping up. And finally, like, peak MarTech. And then, of course, ChatGPT and the Gen AI explosion that happened. In the year from 2023 to 2024, we all of a sudden saw this massive reacceleration of the number of companies in the space. In particular, applications around commerce and sales, and of course, applications around content and experience. 47% growth in commerce and sales, 35%. And these are numbers that are based on thousands of products growing by that much. Now, 24 to 2025, we did start to see, a little bit more of a leveling off. But still, 10% growth across all of these different MarTech categories when you already have a baseline of over 10,000. That's insane. And I know you know this, but that landscape is an absolutely terrible way to represent the industry because each of those little microdots is equally unreadable. If you actually structure companies in this space based on their revenue, market scale, it forms a long tail, right? You have a few dozen companies that are in the head, maybe a few hundred companies that are in the torso, and then this incredible long tail. Some of which are startups that aspire to disrupt the torso and the head, but also a lot of more specialized tools that are within particular ecosystems, or you're seeing more services companies bundle their secret sauce into a product. Lots of options out there. Now, what are people doing with this stuff as far as AI goes? Let me tell you what were doing 6 months ago when we did the State of MarTech for 2025, going through like a pretty large survey of adoption. One of the things that's very clear, to everyone by that point in time, is AI assistants had totally crossed the chasm. 800 million users for ChatGPT. It is still incredibly impressive to think about just how quickly that happened. But agent and agentic workflows back in the spring, this was still pretty new. We were seeing early adopters play around with it, folks just getting started. And one of the questions that was early on here was like, okay, what's going to happen with all these AI agents and the rest of the MarTech stack? Are they just going to kill it? Are they just you're going to rip out Salesforce and replace it with a network of agents? And one should be very careful about making predictions into the future in this environment in which things are moving so quickly. But here in the present, we actually see quite the opposite. And you even saw it in a number of the presentations today, even how like the folks at OpenAI and Anthropic are using like Salesforce and Slack and all these things as foundational systems around which AI is now coming in as a layer above that. When we look through these tech stacks, and this is a simplified version of this slide, you've got things such as increasingly a universal data layer in companies of any scale. And this is stuff like Snowflake and Databricks and GPQ. On top of that, we are still very much seeing an increased need of these systems that act as the arbitrators for that data, whether it's a CRM or a CDP or digital asset management. We're starting to see more and more interesting AI decisioning and AI generation that leverages those capabilities. Of course, all of our channels are engagements. We have new channels and new kinds of engagements now too, but the old ones are still very much alive. And then we see these AI agents and orchestration happening at a layer above that and adding tremendous value on that. I put a little thin layer in yellow at the top here about buyer side agents, and we're going to talk about those in a bit because for all the disruption that's happening elsewhere in the stack, that's really where the huge change is coming. By the way, if you want a much more detailed version of that thing, congratulations, it'll be in the deck that you can download. So I do have more recent data on this. We're right in the middle of working on our MarTech for 2026 report that we'll publish in December. And one of the things we did was we surveyed a number of MarTech and marketing op leaders for, okay, as you starting to adopt agents and agentic workflows, what's the relationship of these things with your current tool set? Are you enhancing existing capabilities? Are you coming up with entirely new use cases? Or are you replacing things like, oh, we used to do this in this app, and now we just have AI do it? And the vast majority were enhancing. And again, you saw this in a number of the cases that were described here today. It's not disrupting the primary processes that are working here, but it's augmenting them with capabilities that are very unique to AI. We're also starting to see some of these things implementing like net new use cases that just weren't even possible before. So much of what we can do in particular with unstructured data, behavioral data, that's just really hard to do use cases with that for a lot of systems, becoming pretty easy. And there are cases of there being replacement. It is not entirely additive, but at least here in the present, this is not a zero-sum game. Now, on that basis, I want to just talk a little bit about what we see people adopting agents within their existing use stack. And one of the ways is, again, if agentic has become the word, is that we're going to have a debate as to what should be the word for 2025. Should it be vibe? Should it be agentic? If agentic is a word, then agenticness can't be far behind. All right, let's talk a little bit about the amount of agenticness that exists in the workflow. Because on one end of the spectrum, we have all these like marketing automations and sales sequence workflows that we've had for a decade or more here now. These are things largely been manually created, very, as they call, deterministic. If this, then that, always works the same way. One of the first things people have started to do is to say, all right, let's keep that general structure of a lot of these workflows and automations, but we might plug in some little Gen AI magic somewhere. So for instance, maybe I actually want to take a set of these emails that came in and do some sort of summary on them or attribute a sentiment to it. And then I'll pass it on to the next deterministic step in that workflow. Start to get a little bit more agentic when you're like, okay, we're actually going to let the AI maybe go out, do some research on a prospect, and then based on its research, have it make a conclusion as to, what sort of score would it apply to that prospect? And then, okay, once we've got that score, then we pass it back on into a more structured deterministic workflow. Except maybe at the end of the line somewhere, we're like, and then we will generate a prep report for the sales rep when they have that call. So we started to bring in pieces here, but the structure is still largely there. In a few cases, and this is happening more in B2C than B2B at the moment, we're starting to see reinforcement learning type agents introduced into these processes as well, too, where the AI starts on its own very much experimenting with different combinations of how to engage a particular target audience. And then based on what it's learning about what's working with whom, it is dynamically adapting that. And then way off on the other end of the spectrum here is, this vision that eventually you could have agents that come up with the plan, they do the reasoning on it. They're the ones that are then making the decisions as to what steps are going to be executed, have dynamic generative AI capabilities within those executions and so on. Now, the thing here is, this is not a maturity model. This is not, the left is bad and the right is nirvana. It's that there's actually trade-offs that we get between these things. The stuff about the deterministic rules-based approach, one of the things that's great about it is just how reliable and predictable, explainable it is. You put the same inputs into that process 100 times, you're going to get the exact same output 100 times. They have some disadvantages. They can be fragile. If something changes in the environment, it might not be able to adapt on its own. At the other end of the spectrum, as we bring more of these agentic capabilities in, It's basically almost a mirror trade-off on that. Okay, now you start to end up with things that can actually be robust. They can adapt on their own in reasoning to changes that are happening in the environment without you having to explicitly define that. But now you're starting to introduce probability and variance in what may happen. I'm not saying one's good and one's bad. These are different trade-offs, and it is a continuum that we can work across. All right, let's back up, because that long tail I showed you was a little stubby, actually. It used to take up the whole slide, but then we had to make room for what I've now been calling the hypertail, because if we thought the long tail was long, oh my God, we are seeing the renewed explosion of custom software being built. And some of this is being built by professional engineers, maybe in your IT department. A number of interesting things are being created by citizen developers. Vibe coding, we'll chat about that a bit. And then we're even seeing stuff where AI agents are just doing a bunch of software development on their own, and you don't even necessarily know about it. Prove you this. So I went to Claude. I was like, go get me a list of the most valuable companies in the world for the past 20 years. Draw an area chart, shows the growth over time. Split the area chart into two bands, tech companies and non-tech companies. I want to see how the split has changed over time. And of course, Claude is my best friend. He'll do that for me in 10 seconds. Great. Not like I had to do any sort of coding in this. You click through on exactly, Claude, how did you do that? Turned out, it wrote a little React program to be able, all right, once it's got this data, here's how we're going to figure out how to display it. Boom, run it. And then once it created that graph, that software went away. Well, if you talk about software on demand, this is like this instantaneous software that blinks into existence to do one particular task and goes away. That was been unheard of just a few years ago. And it's happening as many of you are using these tools without you even realizing the software is being developed. If we have a graduate level version of this talk at some point in time, we'll talk about how there's some really interesting things with hyperscaler technology underlying this entire spectrum. But that's for another day. All right, let's talk a little bit about vibe coding, which, this just wasn't a thing until February this year. And Andrej Karpathy, I'm sure many of you is now infamous, had this tweet. What we call those X things, I still call them tweets. There's a new kind of coding I call vibe coding, where I have to put this in the voice of what I'm imagining, where you get into the vibes and embrace the exponentials. Forget the code even exists. I don't know, I'm here quick question, quick poll for the audience. East Coast or West Coast? All right, that's a euphemism. It's such a strange hybridization of 60s counterculture and 2020s techno-optimism. In the 60s, they had the summer of love. What do we end up? We ended up with the summer of vibes. I'm not sure I don't think we got the better version. Can I poke a little more fun at vibe and then we'll get serious again? Because I ask people, people are asking, what does this mean for this vibe this or vibe that? I'm like, all right, here's the cheat sheet. Vibe coding is what we used to call no code, low code. Oh, all right. Vibe marketing is largely what we've been calling growth hacking for a number of years. Vibe selling, it's a thing. Hustle culture, come on. Vibe finance. Yes, some of you in the room remember Enron, creative accounting, or as the SEC calls it, fraud. And then, quite frankly, Vibe anything is what we used to call shadow IT, and some places still do. All right, but let me show you this, because, all right, I suspect a number of you have used Lovable. I'm just going to give you one quick example. When I was asking Lovable, build me a web app for a customer support AI chatbot, a calculator, inputs, number of tickets, cost per ticket, average time to close, resolution rate I'm targeting, and then output of monthly cost savings. Again, this would be the sort of thing as a frontline marketer, even quite frankly, as a sales rep, I might want as an experience. It goes off, okay, I can create that calculator for you. One of the things about Lovable is it's very chatty. It really likes to show off what it's doing for you while it's doing it. All right, I'll entertain it. And then 20 seconds later, it pops out with, okay, here's a calculator you can plug on your website. People can fill out the fields and then I'll do the calculation. I'm like, come on, filling out fields, that's 2011. Can you convert those inputs, text boxes to sliders? Sure. Bam, there I go. And this is nothing edited out of this. These were literally the steps I took. Now, this only worked Remember we were talking about the difference between deterministic and probabilistic? There's probabilistic outcomes here. It's really cool that you can actually describe these things in English and it does programming for you. Actually, this is my preferred quote from Andrej. But as you start trying to do more and more with this, particularly as a non-technical person, you start to go down a rabbit hole. It was fun. I don't know if any of you follow Jason Lemkin and Faster. He was doing this summer and he was like posting on LinkedIn as he was doing it. So we got to like watch live where he started on, vibe coding is great. I've got these 10 apps that I'm going to build. I'm going to run my whole business. And that's like day 1 or 2. He's so excited and happy. I'm staying up all night. By day 3 or 4, I'm starting to notice that as I fix this thing, this other thing breaks. And this is kind of, a week or so later, he finally like does this post where he's like, okay, here's things we can do with this for a non-engineer. Here's a bunch of stuff you shouldn't do. And he had this like red, green, yellow sort of thing of, okay, green light, you could do basic web apps, prototypes. We'll talk about that. Internal apps. That's all great. When you start doing things that are with sensitive data, okay, now you're getting into some areas you probably want a pro involved in this. You start to get things more complex. It quickly can get away from you. And yeah, if you're thinking you're going to use Lovable to like vibe code Salesforce, just don't. So I took his post and I'm like, we can call this the Lemkin scale. Where is it safe to buy? Where is it? And this will move. This will shift over time. But for now, it's relatively narrow. Coming back to our summer vibe.
Hey, man, I'm totally coding the vibes. I just think of a CRM and it appears. Cool.
All right. So I was playing around with it and I'm like, where do I put this somewhere? My family has absolutely forbidden me from doing any more Sora videos. All right. So let's get a little bit more focused in on some of the characteristics of where this should be a very valuable ad, particularly for marketers and sales teams. So when you look at these dimensions of software, one of them is the simplicity to the complexity. And the simpler something is, more likely it is it can be vibe coded. If you're using things for internal use cases, the stakes are just much lower. If it's something that's only going to be used by a few users, maybe a small team, okay, yeah, no, that's good. Maybe it's something that's going to be a short lifespan. Maybe you're making something for an event like this, and then after this event, it's going to go away. The sort of risk scale, even if we just look at it from the dimension of the sort of data that you're working with, there's a bunch of data you can work with that's low-risk data. There's a bunch of data you can work with that's high-risk data. And one of the things that came up multiple times in conversation today is this thing like the difference between stuff that is ambiguous versus things like, we know very well defined what we need to do. Vibe coding is amazing for working through ambiguity. So many CMOs I've talked to who, I have an idea, but to try and describe it in a spec just from a blank sheet of paper, very hard to do. But being able to play around with the vibe code is sort of like, yeah, this is what I want. And now that I see it, I wanted to do this other thing. This is amazing. And the thing about this left hand of this spectrum is this is what Clay Christensen would have called like disruptive innovation. This is the underserved segment. This is the sort of stuff that we quite frankly never built software for because the cost and the resourcing and the talent required, it would have been wasted. It was just not economically justifiable for all these cases on the left. And this is exactly where things around vibe coding applications are adding so much value. And going back to that thing about with these slide presentations, it's not just about volume, it is about creativity. I think this is the biggest unlock for marketing and sales is this ability to accelerate the amount of experimentation we do. One of my heroes, Linus Pauling, was a Nobel Prize winning chemist, actually won 2 Nobel Prizes, one for chemistry and then a Peace Prize later in his life. And he was, one of the reasons he was so famous is he just was behind so many incredible breakthroughs in his field. And a journalist was interviewing him at one point and asked, like, how'd you do this? How'd you keep coming up with so many great ideas? And his answer was, listen, if you want to have a good idea, have a lot of ideas. This is the thing that AI is unlocking for us, is it's giving us the ability to experiment with a lot more ideas, a lot more quickly, even in cases where we don't even have to get it out into market. To figure out, let me try this, let me see this. Let me run this by this synthetic audience of digital twins I have. What do they think about it? This experimentation rate is incredible. So I want to talk a little bit more about agents, because this is obviously the year of agents. And trying to think about agents in marketing and go-to-market, I put them in three domains. There's these agents that we're using behind the scenes to actually do our work, do our production. This is most of what we see today. There are agents that we control as the brand, but we're letting them engage with customers. And then there are agents that our customers have control over. And we'll go through a bunch of these. Again, so many agents for marketers, sales teams, and whatnot. The agents for customers are interesting. The customer service chatbots, their new generation of them is a great example of this. By the way, actually, this is a great use case. We've had chatbots on websites for years, and let's just be honest with ourselves. I've largely sucked. Just really bad experiences until this past year. And now you're starting to see, because again, plugging in these LLMs that give them this incredible conversational capability as we get better at using what is now called context engineering, of making sure we're getting the right data from customer records, from knowledge bases, from ticket histories, and like feeding that in. Actually, these reports of some of these top customer service bots from like Finn and Sierra, resolution rates of 60, 70, 80%. Pretty impressive. Then have all the agents of customers. I'm going to save this for a bit because that one gets fun. The thing I want to say about agents for marketers, and this came up earlier in discussions today, having tracked MarTech for almost 20 years now, there was basically this parallel rise between the capabilities that MarTech could do and the complexity of working with it. And they moved in lockstep. We got a lot more capabilities here over this past decade and a half. I think almost anyone who works with this stuff, particularly anyone in marketing or sales ops, it got a lot more complex. A real pain point. In fact, this has largely become like the ceiling on what we can do with the technology. It's not that the technology isn't technically possible. A much more sophisticated marketing, much more sophisticated go-to-market. It's just that as humans, we could just only manage so much of that. And this is where things get really amazing with AI, is because I forget who was saying it earlier. I think it was Ash from Anthropic, right? Like AI, like its ability to read a textbook in 3 seconds and make this is the sort of stuff humans just can't do. The fact that we are now able to start to see AI agents help in the execution and the design of more and more MarTech, one of the things we're already seeing is the complexity of what's actually happening in market is starting to expand tremendously, more than it has in years. But the user interface on this complexity is actually starting to get simpler and easier. This is the really exciting thing for us in these agents behind the scenes. The agents for customers. So I mentioned the customer service ones. I think very highly of those. Another example of those are AI SDRs. A number of you perhaps experimenting with them. And I think this is the moment where I just want to frame, there's a 2x2 I've used many times over the years of working with companies on how they think about automation and go to market. And it's this 2x2 of, all right, what's efficient for you as the company? And what's efficient for the actual customer that you're engaging with? And there are certainly things out there that are efficient for neither. And the technical label for that is they just suck for everyone. Obviously, what we want to get to is things that like, okay, this is an incredibly efficient process for the company and it's efficient and delightful to the customer. There's very interesting scenarios where things are not efficient for the company, but they can be incredibly delightful for the customer, and used judiciously, this can be a phenomenal way to build loyalty and love. The one that is the absolute danger zone is this thing where we apply things that become incredibly efficient from the company's internal metrics perspective, and it actually dramatically worsens the experience for customers. And any of you who have ever dealt with one of those crazy IVR phone tree thing, you know what that's like. Now, if someone, hey, wow, yeah, all these calls, they got automatically routed to the right place, and we were more efficient about this. This is phenomenal. I get a raise. Meanwhile, I'm like pressing buttons. How do I get to an operator? This is the thing to be careful of, and I think to be particularly careful of with AI SDRs. We're particularly in this learning period where often you're seeing AI SDRs get intermixed with other kinds of more traditional sales sequences and operations. My favorite example of like automation is from Fantasia, Mickey and the gets the broom doing its chores, and isn't this wonderful? Until all the brooms keep doing the same motion over and over again and turns to a disaster. The wizard comes home and Mickey's fired. We're seeing just a lot of examples out there of these sort of AI-ish agents that aren't necessarily paying attention to the customers they're engaging with. I'd asked a bunch of marketers about a year ago, all right, so not for your business, but when you have MarTech vendors who are engaging you, what AI capabilities of theirs do you think are going to make your life better or worse? And I'll just skip to the punchline. The one that they basically all said, oh my God, this is going to make my life terrible, was this idea of, all these MarTech vendors are going to use these AI SDRs to just hound us to death. The use case that they almost universally said, oh yeah, and we've only got a few of those out here now. The use case that they actually love was this one of saying, listen, if my vendors will use AI to make their sales reps better able to answer my questions, yeah, actually that will make my experience as a buyer better. And again, we saw some of these examples here today. Just in Ash's session from Anthony, this just ability to prep salespeople with here's all the information about this particular account and these particular needs and speak right to it. This is a win-win. All right. So I was talking about AI agents. We have the ones for marketers. The fascinating thing is, of course, now customer AI is starting to come into play. Tom Fishburne, marketunist, if you don't follow him, worth a weekly dose of laugh. Sydney gave a phenomenal presentation here about, okay, one of the ways we're now having to rethink about things and go to market is how do we not just engage our customers directly, but how do we influence and engage with these agents that are acting on their behalf? A lot of really exciting stuff happening there with AEO. By the way, since I was in New York and I saw this yesterday when we were driving in, before we go too far in AEO, it might be worth taking a moment to ask, do we go too far on the SEO thing? This is a real restaurant in New York. All right. And they're loving it. Very smart. Okay. But search for it. Trust me on this one. I can pick on Gartner for a moment. A few years ago, they did a survey of CEOs. So I'm just asking, when do you think machine customers are going to become a significant portion of your business? And the median turned out to be around by 2030. Now, I was in 2022. You have to be forgetting, what has happened since 2022 has blown us all away. Even just taking a look at some of the things that were announced from OpenAI earlier this year. This whole thing with the agentic commerce protocol and instant checkout, the deal with Shopify and Etsy and Walmart. This is changing fast in very big ways. Because I think most of you are B2B, rather than focus on a B2C scenario, I want to talk to you about the change this has on B2B buying. And for that, I'm going to go to ChatGPT Atlas. I'm going to give you an example here, and I chose my alma mater just because I know them very well, so I could intuitively cross-check, okay, is it on the right track or not? So pricing pages on large MarTech platforms are an art form of their own, if you define art very loosely. HubSpot, I think, does generally a very good job of this, but I went to the HubSpot pricing page. They got a lot of products, a lot of different things you can do. The first thing I did is I went to the HubSpot chatbot, and I'm like, okay, I want to sort through all this. Can you tell me, for a 5-person company, 50,000 contacts, how much is this going to cost me? And it comes back, it's all right, before we get disconnected, what's a good email address for you to follow up with? I'm like, really, do you really think that's working here in 2025? I know what you're doing. No, I don't want to give you my email address yet. Sorry, I didn't understand that. Why wouldn't you give me your email address? How could we answer this question without your email address? And eventually I just walk away. How'd we do? All right. Sorry, HubSpot. But here I am with Atlas. Let me click the little button there. And I say, okay, let me ask my agent while we're on this page, how much will a 5-person company with 50,000 contacts cost me to adopt HubSpot for sending emails? Atlas is my friend. It actually goes in, doesn't just calculate it calculates multiple scenarios, gives me a bunch of trade-offs on, okay, if you want these capabilities versus this one. Holy crap. And then finally, you'll also summarize and say, yeah, you can expect to spend about this much, maybe 40 to 55K yearly. All right, that alone would be pretty wild. And don't you love how these AI assistants, they're helpful. Oh, you want me to run the same cost comparison for Salesforce? Sure, why not? I know the Salesforce people are saying, the joke's on them because we don't publish our pricing. Yeah, actually, turns out ChatGPT doesn't care about that. It's had its own estimates, and it takes its best shot estimate and gives me the comparison on that. Now you got me thinking. So, for anyone in sales here, this is one of those like hold on to your butts moments. I'm like, okay. These things you just told me about HubSpot, those are the list prices. What's the actual discounted price I should expect to pay? Atlas is so helpful. Here's HubSpot's actual pricing in practice. And I will not verify or deny anything on this, but I will say this is very fascinating what it has concluded. And then it actually comes up and will say, okay, so actually the real price you should expect to pay is this. Now, whether it's right or wrong, holy shit. The expectation that has now just been set in my mind as a buyer, there's no way I'm going to pay more than that. And it's given me a whole bunch of logic and rationale I'm taking to the negotiation call. Oh, and by the way, happy to give me the same stuff for Salesforce as well, too. So we've gone overconfident about how much control we actually think we have over the buyer's journey because we've got pretty good at architecting it as much as possible. We're about to enter a new stage here where we're just not going to have that much control. Now, my last quick thought here, because I often get asked to say, I got my job, Bruce the Shark from Jaws. I think this applies more broadly in go-to-market, but just for marketing, before AI, if you simplify marketing into, there's MarTech, there's production analysis, there's strategy and creative. You ask people what marketing was all about. Everyone's the strategy and creative. That's the marketing. That isn't actually where we spent most of our calories. We spent most of our calories on production and analysis work in support of that creative. And then, quite frankly, most companies had relatively underpowered MarTech and marketing operations teams to support that. With AI, there's no doubt that it is dramatically cutting out so much of that production and analysis work. And there are certainly folks who say, great, then I guess I can just get rid of half of my marketing department because I don't need to do that with humans anymore. I think it's a terrible mistake. And the reason why, above all else, is this efficiency gain is rapidly becoming fully commoditized. Every single business on the planet is going to get the benefit of that sort of efficiency in production analysis. The only way to be able to stay ahead competitively is to be able to reinvest that talent and that resourcing into greater experimentation and creativity and ideas. I also think we're in a window where, quite frankly, greater investment in the marketing technology, the marketing operations, and that writ large, not just like MarTech tools specifically, even getting better at the universal data layer within your company to be able to feed and pipe things here is the thing that's going to pay off so many dividends. All right. Wow. You've indulged me for 40 minutes here. I know this is a lot to take in, but I can't begin to express to you how absolutely exciting it is for all of us to be here at this moment in time where literally every playbook, every opportunity about how go-to-market works is like ours to reimagine. It's exhausting, it's tiring, it's challenging, it's all those things, but it's an enormous gift too. So thank you so much for having me. And I think we have a few times for questions. All right. You can ask me questions or you can go get a drink. Okay. Who's asking me questions? Yes.
How do you think fundamentally B2B pricing will change through all this?
I think pricing transparency is pretty much where this is headed, at least for things that are able to be priced transparently, like what we thought of as traditional software, things associated with seat, consumption licenses, outcome stuff. There's still going to be a lot of variability when you get into the services side of the world for things that aren't services as software. But I don't see how you get away from the transparency issue given AI just frankly figuring it all out. In fact, actually, the thing I would actually then lean further into the transparency side is the worst thing to you would be the AI is taking its best guess and it's just wrong. But there's no way, like if it's hallucinating and, your prospect is looking at that hallucination and that's what's setting their expectations, you've got a challenge. So, you might want to think about like actually doing our best to make sure that these engines actually have as accurate of a vision of our pricing as possible is probably in our interest. Okay. Thank you so much for having me.